Hello and welcome to Day 1 of FEI Digital Week. In just a moment, we'll be hearing from Ralph Morales from SmartOrg, formerly with HP, and David Matheson, President and CEO of SmartOrg. Ralph and David will be presenting Missing Keys to Delivering Innovation, the Value of Evidence and the Evidence of Value. My name is Amanda with TMRE, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Before we begin, let me explain how you can participate in the presentation. First, if you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the Help button on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. We welcome your questions during the webinar, so in order to submit your questions, simply type them in the question window on the left-hand side of your screen and hit Submit. We'll be answering as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion that will follow the main presentation, but feel free to send in your questions at any time. If at any time you are having audio difficulties, simply hit your F5 button to refresh your webcast console. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded and it will be available beginning tomorrow when you're notified via email with the recording. So with that, I'd like to welcome Ralph and David.
Hi everyone, this is David Matheson. I'm President and CEO of SmartOrg, and I am delighted to be working with Ralph on this presentation. I was just reflecting with Ralph. He and I have known each other for almost 20 years, and over this time I've worked with many innovative people, and it's stunning to find someone who has both found success and failure, and the key is knows the difference. So I'm delighted that he's going to present some of the things that make the difference between success and failure with innovation. Before I hand it over to Ralph, let me tell you a little bit about SmartOrg. SmartOrg is a capability building company that connects innovation and finance. Our portfolio evaluation platform builds your capability to align on how to drive upside and on where and how much to invest. We provide consulting and software services. Companies like DuPont use us to improve their return on innovation investments by a factor of 2. A little orientation to this topic. Innovation is well studied, and here's a result of 3 studies from several different sources. It's no surprise to this audience that after some regulatory operational issues, innovation there on the left is one of the top topics on executives' minds. If you look at the particulars, things like commercializing ideas or risk-averse culture and so on, I think there's a sort of theme in here, which is fundamentally that many executive investors know they need innovation. But when it comes to putting real money behind it, when it's more than just a pet or a toy and you need to get serious results from it, how do they actually know what they're getting? And I think I'm guilty, innovators are often guilty of just a little too much hand-wavy and not quite enough rigor. So maybe to set the frame for this, let's start with a poll question, also to warm you guys up for polls, which we'll be using many of during the time. What is your most challenging innovation stage? So I've got a poll open here, so if you would please go ahead and select for you the dot, and then be sure to hit submit so that we know that you've put your answer in. So this would be the time to click a button. And I see a few folks are coming into this. And I think we're going to give this a few more minutes. I think folks are waking up. We're starting to see folks coming in here. And please do it. Let's give this another 10 seconds. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here are the results. You can see a third of you struggled most with collecting ideas, similar for delivery, evaluation and selection, and validation together count for another third of these. So, yeah. So, Ralph, what are your thoughts on this?
It's not surprising. I think the first, the collecting ideas, especially collecting good ideas, is where it all starts. That's the genesis and the seeds. And then the delivery, this is where kind of the lean method and how do you make storied organizations move forward on ideas that are new and novel in business models. So I think that's not surprising to me about this result. So good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself a little bit and then kind of jump into a topic about successful return on innovation. I have a storied career. I worked for HP for 22 years. There were a couple chapters in that book, and I'm writing a new book as we speak. The first chapter was in corporate finance, so I started off as an analyst out of MBA school, quickly rose up to the rank of finance director, and then eventually switched over to the light side, dark side, I'm not sure, depends on where you come from, doing new business development where I was an innovation scout. This is a classic innovator's role where you're asked, is there, and given a small amount of resources to prove it out. And then in the final chapter of my career, I was the director of innovation for HP's CTO, which was charged with building out billion-dollar businesses. And as David mentioned in the intro, I've got some scars, and I have high humility and high shame resilience. So I'm willing to share those failures as well as some of the successes, because it's a tough road to be an innovator, and I want to share as much as I can and help build capability in the innovation space. So the successful return on innovation kind of hinges on these three stories, and I'll tell them as small vignettes. The first one is the evidence of value, the second one is the value of evidence, and the last one is how to match up the innovator dialect to the investor language. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on my first story. So early on in my career, I was this particular scenario is around retail publishing solutions. So at the time, it's 2003, HP has developed some novel inkjet technologies, basically a thing called page-wide array. The ink, instead of the ink moving back and forth, the paper just moves underneath the print bar. It's awesome. It's fast, and it's great for high ink applications like photos. The incumbents in this market, think about going to Costco or Walmart or CVS to get your photos. They're struggling. Kodak kind of missed on the digital camera innovation, and Fuji has the innovator's dilemma in that they're making 85% gross margin putting chemistry on film, and so they're like, hey, the capture side went digital, we're fine on the output side. And for HP, we had no revenue in this space. There was no HP printer behind the counter in retail. So for us, this is like $7 billion market, 0% share, lots of technology. So we created a graphic that said, look, this could be $1 billion business. And so we presented that to management, and kind of my question, rhetorical to the audience, is how many of you seen this type of graph? You basically spend some money in the feasibility phase. It gets deep and it gets expensive while you're scaling development. You launch this thing into the market, and then it's the hockey stick up and to the right where you make lots of money and everybody's happy. Now, this is not foreign to our investors. In the inkjet supplies business, our business model was razor and blade, so the investors, the board of directors, et cetera, they're completely used to making multiple $100 million technology platform investments and then commercializing these in markets for billions and billions of dollars. So but hopefully some of this graph, some of you have seen a graph of this type. So then we got started. And in phase one, we started off a little bit slow, but we more than made up for it as we started to get the team rolling and spend money. And in phase one, we proved the technology. We actually launched an instant print kiosk that had this that could print 4x6s. We made a good chunk of change, and the incumbents were like, this is just a toy. There's no threat. They don't know what they're doing. So the incumbents were basically naysaying, and we basically told management, look, here's what we said in the green line. We're on the orange line. Everything's running according to plan. And then in phase two, we started to win top retailers. Walmart switches over from Kodak to HP. Tesco switches over from Kodak to HP. Kmart in Australia switches over from Kodak to HP. Hopefully you recognize the theme and my unstated objective, which was to put Kodak out of business. I think I did it twice. And so the competitors start declaring bankruptcy. We've tripled our revenues, but it's around 2006, 2007, Enron, Goldman Sachs, Fannie Mae. There's a little bit of a financial crisis in the world. And so we go to management and say, hey, corporate buyers are tightening their purse strings, but so we're going to slide the curve over to the right a couple years, but it's still on trajectory up and to the right. We're about to enter the hockey stick phase. So everything is going according to plan. In phase 3, we're ready for takeoff. We're approaching $400 million in revenue. We've got a contract pipeline that's worth $1.5 billion, and we've got the kind of a last man standing for this market platform printer that is 3 months away from launch. Now, at this point, we've gone through 4 CEOs, Carly Fiorina, Mark Hurd, and Leo Apotheker being the last one, who basically drained our HP bank account of $13 billion buying a company out of the UK, which was supposed to be the Google of enterprise. And so Meg Whitman shows up, and it's a triage situation. She creates a 2x2 grid, and she says, all right, show me market TAM growth rates. If they're negative, that's below the line, and if they're not cash flow positive businesses, that's below the line, and we know where to stop spending money. And so a decision is made to basically shut down RPS based on those conditions. So an executive VP, we lobbied hard, of course. An executive VP says, look, Ralph, this is our job. We make bets, $100 million bets on billion-dollar market explorations. We have dye sublimation for fabrics coming. We have a digital print press, which is 2 stage gates back from you, and we've got other technologies in pipeline going after other markets. What did we miss? Because if our historical track record is what our forward track record looks like, this is not acceptable to shareholders. And so we did a kind of a retrospective, and it kind of came back to articulating the evidence of value. When we made the proposal, this was actually a graphic from the initial investment proposal to the board of directors. We said, look, there's some uncertainty here. This proposal will yield about $1.7 billion of enterprise value. There were some assumptions about commercial value, technical capability, and other factors in the business plan. And they had a range of uncertainty. There were some assumptions like this first one, which had to do with like the dollars of photo that people purchased per day in retail. And there was a range, right, that could drive this thing up to $3 billion or down to $500 million. And there were some technical attributes that had downside, like service and support. But if we delivered on them, we'd be okay. So this is the basis of that. But then once the project got going, we all moved into program manager mode. We put the yoke on the team, and we broke out the whips, and the meetings will continue until morale improves. And so in phase 1, this is what the graphic looked like in retrospect. So the engineering team basically said, look, we told you we could do page-wide array. What part of that did you not believe? There's an opportunity here, but we were in small stores and not in the main part of the market. We were early adopter, so the uncertainty around the market hadn't been fully resolved. The next phase looked like this, right? The enterprise value had dropped to 1.4. The support had basically said, look, there's lots more downside than there is upside. And we were really, really pushing hard to push throughput and demand generations. Our clients were asking for this, and we were looking for it because we're basically, our business model is based on throughput. If you're not printing and selling print, we're not making money. And then in phase 3, when Meg showed up, this is what she saw. The management staff is telling you it's a $1 billion opportunity, but there's no upside left. There's just downside. And so the decision actually was, in retrospect, a proper decision. And so, the story here, the lesson here, is when articulating the evidence of value, you have to keep track of what the world is telling you. We focus so much on when. When is this thing going to become gross margin positive? When is first revenue? When is operating profit positive? When is cash flow positive? When, right? And the why gets lost. And the why is actually way more important than the when. If we would have seen these bars going forward from inception to phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, it becomes evident that, the management team is kind of bidding on the 90th percentile outcome, and the size of the opportunity had shrunk.
So, Ralph, a quick question here from Charles, and let me also use this interruption as a way of saying, please type in questions to the Q&A box, and I'll be helping moderate those, so do that. But a quick question from Charles. It looks like you started with this why. Why did you drop it? What caused you to stop doing that?
It's a great question. So most of it was we still had our stage gate checkpoints, but most of the management's attention was focused on the win. And there was also there were changes, right? This was never institutionalized. The beginning stages were handled by a new business creation team and then handed over to a business unit for execution. And so this kind of also highlights the importance of having a stable process in place when businesses are getting created until they're fully off the ground.
I see. So in a way, that the drive to execution pushed you out of innovation thinking, right? And so you became execute rather than
that's a great summary.
Explore. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. So let's go forward to our next to the next chapter. That was a great question, Charles. Thanks for that. So then in Chapter 2, I helped to shut down RPS, and then the CTO of HP approaches me at an internal conference and says, hey, we'd like you to come up and do some scouting for us. We've got a lot of great ideas in labs, and in particular, it's 2015. We've got this IoT initiative underway, and we're kind of the tip of the spear is this smartwatch idea. And so the idea here to set the stage is we've got system-level engineering expertise, right? We moved from Soviet-designed laptops to really thin, really skinny. The picture here is the HP Spectre 13. It's a 1 kilogram, super high-performance, high-definition display laptop. It was released at a fashion show, not at Comdex or CES. There's an emerging device category of wristwear. I don't know how many of you remember Pebble, but they were like the largest Indiegogo. They raised about $12 million in their first campaign. Fitbit had raised $25 million in a Series A. Let me repeat that, a Series A at $25 million. So this category is on fire. Business intelligence is saying, look, compound annual growth rate is going to be 26%. And our team was looking at it and saying, look, HP actually made the world's first smartwatch in 1979 and then basically let go of the market, and Casio and Seiko took it over and made billions of dollars. And we weren't going to beat Apple and Samsung at putting a Galaxy or an iPhone on your wrist. So the thesis was, hey, let's actually do smartwatch with style. And we'll put the brands forward and the technology in the back. And so when you're creating new businesses, one of the things in Lean is you start with a new business model canvas, right? And how many of you have made this type of chart, right? Probably many if you're in the innovation space. And the Smartwatch team made one as well, right? And they had a lot of things on their business model canvas for the segment. And so the question then becomes, where do you start, right? If it was truly like a puzzle, you'd find the corners and you'd find the pieces with the edges, and then you'd start to fill it all in. So my question to you is, how have you prioritized your innovation discovery? And we've got a couple choices here, right? At the top of one end of the spectrum is we don't prioritize. The team just works in their comfort zone. The next one is we start with the lowest effort/cost elements. Third is we start with proving the value proposition and the jobs to be done. Fourth is we start with the hardest and biggest unknown. Fifth is we start with the greatest visibility factor to gain traction. And lastly is we start with the greatest uncertainty relative to value. So I'll give you guys a couple seconds to make sure to click the radio button and press submit so that your answers are logged. We'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay. 5, 4.
I think you got a couple coming in here, Ralph, so people are reading through it.
Okay.
Yeah. There. A few moments there. And, still a few more.
Last minutes. All right.
Last minute. I think now do your countdown, right?
7, 6, 5. This will not be SpaceX. There will be no rocket landing. 3, 2, 1. All right. So with that, we'll close the poll, and let's see what people said. Okay, so there's a good chunk of people say we start with the value prop and the job to be done. And that makes a lot of sense, right? It's like that's part of the answering the question, is there there? What is the unique value proposition, and what is it, design thinking says, after 5 whys, what is it that the customer or the end user really wants? And that's, there's a lot in lean methodology and innovation that starts with that. There's even a smaller chunk of people that go after we don't prioritize, and I love that. That's a truthful and honest answer. That happens. And some say we start with the greatest uncertainty relative to value, but hardly anybody starts with the greatest visibility factor. So this next lesson will not be that poignant.
One little comment. I think the honest answer, if you don't prioritize, is, hey, in my experience, people talk a lot to the theory, right? They say what they're supposed to say, but what they actually do is they invent hypotheses that are in their comfort zone. I mean, this is probably the number one thing I see. So I'm a little surprised the poll shows otherwise.
Well, so thank you for that insight. So what this team did is they said, we're gonna let's show the opportunity has viability for HP. So the executive investor was like, prove there's a there there. This is a common phrase many people have heard. Get a quick win and prove that this idea has traction. And so the team did that. In less than 9 months, they met up with the designer, Michael Bastian. They create this thing called the Chrono Wing. And, The Verge basically says, look, this thing looks pretty sexy. And the Wall Street Journal, Walt Mossberg basically said, look, high tech meets high style. This is awesome. And so the innovation activity was, court a designer, work on the hardware bomb, and determine, what is the value proposition. You get 1.5 seconds to communicate information to people on the wrist at a glance. And they're going to use this information to decide, do I pull my phone out of my pocket? Do I reach for it out of my purse? How should I react? And of interest back to the Smart Style is this is actually 3 segmented screens. There's a small round screen, there's a long rectangular screen, and a small square screen. So in terms of the roadmap to Smart Style, this watch has no hands, but it's got all the screens and it's all packed in. They sold 5,000 units and they made $1 million, and they proved a minimum viable product. So now they go back to management after Christmas, and management says, great, show me how this bad boy scales. What's the sales and marketing roadmap? Who are you going to work with to get global scale, and how do we leverage our channel, right? How do we blow this thing up? And so the team goes out and they hook Movado. Elle Magazine basically says, look, goodbye mini wrist computers. This thing actually looks like a watch. And wearable.com says, look, the Movado Bold smartwatch is actually a wearable in disguise. So for those that aren't familiar, Movado is a very iconic brand out of Switzerland with this moon at the 12 o'clock. This particular watch, the LEDs would light up. So, if my girlfriend was calling, the 1 would light up. If my boss was calling, 6 would light up, things like that nature. And then there's a LED ring around the outside, so if I pressed one of the buttons, it would tell me, oh, Ralph, you're 50% to your step goal, okay? So it gives me a little bit of contextual information, and it looks quite stylish, and it's got the hands. So, again, they worked on the innovation activity was, hey, how do we make this thing fashionable? They started pumping this thing through Best Buy because we sell printers and laptops through Best Buy. So our business cards and our channel people have great access to electronic superstores. And then it's a watch. It's got hands. It's got a second hand. It unequivocally looks like a watch. Additionally, it has a mobile application. And this is part of the value proposition, right, is the brands can now directly interact with their customers through this app. In the case of Movado, they were actually showcasing things in the app like scarves and designer wear and other types of things from the company. And we also started to serve the other half of the population with not just men's watches, but women's watches as well. So they tripled the unit volume, right? And this is what the Mossberg line says. You want to triple, triple, double, double. So the first year out, we've tripled, and revenue's gone up. And so now the executives are like, okay, this is nice, but it's only 15,000 units. How do we prove that units can scale? And there's a little bit of doubt. The team's starting to get big. There's a lot of deliverables. Maybe you guys should focus down. And so on that guidance, the team goes out and says, okay, we're going to drive units. So in the watch business, to drive units, you need SKUs. And so Movado loves what we've done, and they basically open up their portfolio of brands: Hilfiger, Lacoste, Boss, Coach, Juicy Couture. We cut a deal with Isaac Mizrahi. In all cases, you basically have a watch with hands, and we float a screen underneath the watch face. And this screen gives you contextual information. If you get a WhatsApp, if you get a text, if you have a meeting, it basically gives you a very, very glanceable piece of information so you can decide kind of what do you want to do next without pulling out your phone. 39 SKUs and 80,000 units later, we've got more brands, right? Like the team has gone nuts. There's more watch sales, but now manufacturing's starting to become tough. 36 SKUs, short runs, materials management, contract manufacturing, it's all getting really tough. Fitbit is starting to do better. The Apple Watch was $899, and now it's starting to approach $699. Most of these watches were sold for $299 to $399. So the smartwatch guys are starting to attack from higher price point. And so we meet with the personal systems group. It's time for this incubation to leave and go into its final nest. And the executive says, look, it's a cool product suite, and I applaud the team for what they've done, but there's no evidence or proof that this business can scale to warrant an investment by our group. And so effective is less than valuable. So at this point, the CTO kind of pulls me off to the side and says, Ralph, in the succession planning, you're next up for the innovation director job. The guy that's running smartwatches will probably soon be exiting the company, and it might behoove you to figure out what happened here and not make the same mistake, because that could be a career-limiting move. So my question to the audience is, this wasn't a lot of money, but in your particular case, how much of your relevant budget is lost due to poor prioritization? Is it so large it's like, hey, I don't know if I could even measure it? Are we talking greater than 46%? You frequently chase shiny things? Is it less than 32%? You're managing better than average? Is it less than 15%? Occasionally we missequence some efforts, or certain teams are off a little bit, or is it less than 5%? Like, bro, we're so lean, there is no fat. So think through of your relevant innovation budget, how much of it is lost due to what might be considered poor prioritization.
And be sure to, when you make your selection, hit the submit button. Yeah. I see some things coming in here.
Oh, okay. People know.
Yeah, they're
like shiny things.
It's a pretty interesting question. It's kind of hard to figure out when, you don't really measure the stuff that doesn't go the right way. So this is a
true
question to think about a little bit.
This is a gut check question.
Yeah, definitely.
So probably not going to have a lot of facts.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see where people's guts lead them.
Well, I see there are still some folks coming in. If you want to stabilizing a little bit here. Once you do your countdown, Ralph. Wait, before we do that, let me just remind everybody, please type in questions. I've had a couple queue up, but do use the question box. At the end, we're going to have a Q&A, and I think it's pretty much stopped coming in. So
okay, well, let's see what the results say about budget loss due to prioritization. Okay, so with 33%, it's pretty average, and we would expect that, right? It's innovation. It's not high efficacy R&D development, so there's going to be some spoilage, right? The next highest one is 25, shiny things. I know all about shiny things. Trust me, I came from tech. And then there's if we were to get to 50%, the next highest answers are either I don't know or we're occasionally off. But that's good. Nobody's Nobody's super lean.
Yeah.
So that's
if you took an average, this is like 40%. Just if this is my eyeball average method, right?
Yeah.
40%. It's 40% waste because of poor prioritization across this group, right?
Right.
So that's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, and I kept it private. Who knows how big these budgets are? It could be from $5 million to $50 million. So we're talking real money here.
Yeah. So I have a question here from Amy. She says, HP seems to be killing its innovation just as it succeeds. Is that HP? Have you seen this elsewhere? What's going on here?
Oh, this is a good question. So it's not just HP. There have been tons of great innovations coming out of HP. I think the recent, couple years ago, was the Sprocket printer for kind of smartphone dye sublimation printing. There's been great strides made in fabric, so by no means is this meant to be a slam on HP. Also, I had a peer group, so I live here in the Silicon Valley and on the South Bay, and basically sponsored an innovator salon where a group of us innovation directors would get together and just talk shop. Right? No, nothing competitive or anything like that. Just, how do we send our kids to college and pay the mortgage and have a decent job that we enjoy waking up to go to? And it's not just an HP issue. This is across my peer group, whether they're at Ford or working in early stage startups. This is a common issue of how do you prioritize what to work on, and also, how do you manage the dialogue with executives, right? So this is not just an HP phenomenon.
Yeah, I certainly say, in my experience, I'd say 30 to 50%. When I get called into a portfolio, 30 to 50% of the work, astonishingly, is some version of waste. And there's one more question. This is a softball, but just to involve the audience a little bit, remind everyone to type in questions. Mariella asks, can you suggest a good way to prioritize? Which I think is actually your next topic.
All right. Right. Mariella, thanks. That was not a paid endorsement. Now we're going to get to the lesson part of this, and that's kind of what is the value of evidence. So in this particular case, like the puzzle in the background, not all of the knowns are equal value. In fact, some are not relevant. This puzzle in the background is interesting because the edges are not edged. They actually look like puzzle pieces, which includes the corners. And then maybe in a more sadistic way, there's about 7 puzzle pieces that have no bearing to the completion of the puzzle. And in a way, this puzzle is a metaphor for the world. We encounter information that looks like it's relevant to what we're doing, but isn't. But we don't know that. And finding where the edges are to solve a puzzle of this nature is difficult. So this question kind of comes down, and as I looked at it, was to the value of ignorance to relationship. And it kind of helps steer a course of innovation action. So on the left-hand side, I kind of start with this idea of like hypothesis ignorance. There's a range of spectrum here, right? If you start with speculative, if you take any given hypothesis, you just don't know. The unknowns are actually unknown, right? And this is often the case in some innovations. There's some things that are just uncertain. Right? I don't know if the answer is 2 or 12, but I know it's somewhere in between there, right? So in those cases, the answer or the hypothesis is just uncertain. And it could have, as we learned in the prior lesson, whether it's 2 or 12, could have big ramifications. And then in other cases for the hypothesis, it's understood. Like it's within a narrow estimation error. Like it might, back to the 2 and the 12, it's 4.7 or 5.2. It's very narrow range, right? So you can take that kind of hypothesis ignorance, and you can start to score it on a 2x2 matrix by what's your ignorance and what's the value impact. And depending on how those hypotheses score out, they kind of fall into these zones, right? If it's of high value volatility and you have high ignorance, that's a discover space. I mean, that's what scouts are for. That's what innovation scouts are all about. They should go knock down that ignorance. In the orange zone, you just need to either specify it or navigate it. And in the blue zone, you mitigate it or validate it. And if it's green, you just manage it. It's something to be managed. And so when you conclude your hypothesis scoring, you can kind of create this score index and rack them and stack them. And so as I reflected back on the Smartwatch team and with them, what they focused on was team accomplishment. They worked on designers, they worked on mobile app, they worked on fashionable, and they worked on the hardware BOM. And those things had, they were maybe uncertain, but they weren't unknown. And so the number of points that they had scored was about 65. Whereas, how many brands would it take? What's the watch assembly methodology that allows you to get to millions of units? Is it electronic superstore? Is it online direct? What's the channel motion for something like this? And how does the module integrate with the watch manufacturers? Those are the things that the investors they desire growth, and those things have the highest score, almost 307 points. And so they focused on the specify and navigate space, and the peril was that they weren't focused on the things that would drive investor growth. And ultimately, the project was canceled. So that kind of drops me to the second lesson, which is that the value of evidence, right? The mission statement here is prioritizing the innovation activities in service of decreasing the opportunity risk, or what I call buying down ignorance. And so that's kind of the lesson point on the value of evidence.
Quite a distinct difference from like abstract learning or just accomplishing stuff, right? So this idea of buying down ignorance is quite a different idea.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so my last kind of story is going to bring all these stories. I have this phrase that I often tell my teams. It's like the sum of all your experiences have prepared you for the moment that you're in right now. And sure enough, in December of 13, the director in charge of the smartwatches left the firm to go work someplace else, and I was promoted. And the mission stayed the same: find $1 billion business, and it's not completely blue ocean; it's the Pacific Ocean in an IoT domain. And so at the beginning, I think quite a few of you said, "Hey, I need great ideas." I was fortunate. I'm at HP Labs. I'm with the CTO. I do not have to look for great ideas. I was blessed. Here's a couple of those ideas, whether it was high-end location-based VR. We were trying to salvage some of the technical attributes of the smartwatch for either education or the office. We had some technologies in retail and government. And so I had a great pool of candidates. The question then becomes, all right, how are we going to prosecute all these candidates? Because there's a lot of unknowns here. And the approach that I took was this activity-based value discovery. Like, how do we buy down the opportunity risk? And so I took the lesson from the smartwatch and said, hey, let's do these business model canvases and let's figure out what the hypothesis ignorances are. Let's score those things. And then tell me what the experiments are going to be to unwind, to learn about those hypotheses. What are you going to do, right? And this is the innovator's activity, right? We're like, hey, why don't we do a mechanical Turk or do this in this market, or why don't we do a survey, or let's go, the design thinking. We're going to go talk to customers, and we're going to do a day in the life, or we're going to go on road trips, or whatever it is. There's a human element in terms of FTE, and there's a cost element. Let's summarize what those experiments are going to cost to learn. And the result of that is kind of this innovation action plan priority. So our goal is kind of to buy down the ignorance with discovery until we get to the point of kind of an investment-grade proposal that the BUs would be willing to take on. And so this becomes a mashup of lean method and financial analysis. We start with business model canvas and hypothesis and experiments. We've got some value map of the evidence of value for these opportunities, which kind of yields out an MPV or an enterprise value range. It's very wide, and sometimes it's space-specific, not opportunity-specific. We've got a value of evidence chart, and we've got an innovation. Every single one of the projects that I was shepherding was put through this process. And my question to you guys is, this is my experience, what metrics do you use to report innovation progress? And on this particular poll, I'm giving you guys a little bit more degrees of freedom. You can actually check all that apply. So there's not one answer here. You can check all that apply to you. The options that I've given you are, do you measure innovation progress on time to market? Do you measure it on how much it's spent? Maybe there's some type of innovation stage gate or R&D stage gate. So do you measure it on the progress to the stage gate? Is enterprise value one of the metrics? Rate of acquisition, this gets back to the value proposition and the job to be done, like how fast are you acquiring customers? Is there a viral coefficient for those that are in the software space? Oftentimes you look for virality. Is it TAM? Look, I need $1 trillion market, Ralph. That's all we look for. Maybe it's unit economics, right? I need gross margin over 70%. Is there a risk readiness score that you use to report your innovation progress, or maybe it's a success rate? So of all those different options there, select the ones that you use. We're going to have a little bit further dialogue on this in the Q&A session, and I'll give you another 7 seconds to check the answers that you use most commonly.
Quick reminder to be sure to hit submit.
Yep. Yeah, if you don't hit submit, then Putin votes for you, and we don't want that.
I think we've sort of stabilized here.
All right.
Probably.
Okay, I'll go 3, and then 2, last chance, and let's see what the poll results are. All right. So we're definitely measuring success. And as I made proposals in the innovation space, one of the EVPs pulled me off to the side and goes, Ralph, I love all this stuff about experimenting and options. I get it. And he goes, but you just got to know, like, your role is like Major League Baseball. You can strike out every now and then, but if your ERA drops below a certain percentage, you get traded. so definitely success rate is pretty high. And then enterprise value is at 50, some type of stage gate process and time to market, like are things moving quickly, and spend. Those tend to be the top 5 metrics. So interesting. All right. Well, let me tell you what happened. So as I pushed all of these projects through, it became a very simple dialogue with the Innovation Investment Board. It's enterprise value. How big could this opportunity be? And the white bar kind of represented, here's kind of our current thinking, our 50-50 of what this opportunity could be like. The second one is you're asking for resources, right? Whether it's people or OpEx, or maybe in some cases a little bit of CapEx, but basically you're asking for money from the bank account and some humans. And so we kind of scaled what we were doing. And then you probably would not use the word ignorance in front of executives. So while inside the team we talked about our ignorance score, with executives you talk about opportunity readiness, right? Like how can I buy down the risk so that this is ready for, to put gas on it? Because that's another phrase executives like to use is, when is it ready that we can really pump some money into this and scale it up? And so we use this kind of this index of opportunity readiness for each one of the opportunities, and that resonated, right? This is an easy message to deliver and articulate. And so then the executives say, great, go forth. And we did it, we do a design sprint for 100 days, different types of activities. So, everybody that's in the innovation space knows how wild that can be, and there's a whole separate set of skills to manage that space. And then you come back, and this is what innovation management accountability looks like. In the case of entertainment, we were out in the field, and it's like, hey, this thing's actually more valuable than we thought. And in fact, while we were out scouting for a, fully immersive high-end headset, there's this other thing we found that's completely new, which is backpack, right? Because I was witnessing this location-based entertainment, and there's basically a matrix-style umbilical cord going up to the ceiling and over, running cabling over to a big, massive workstation. And I'm thinking, wow, this woman's neck is strained and, she can't really move around freely in the space. We built a workstation and sent 4 of them up to the International Space Station. Just rip the screen off, get some DeWalt rechargeable batteries, plug them in, and let's plug the headset into this, right? And so for that particular opportunity, we basically identified, we brought down all the risk of something that wasn't originally in our plan. For some of the others, like government, it's like, yeah, it's exactly like we thought. We learned a little bit. We didn't buy down the risk. There's new risks that emerge, but they're manageable. The retail and office are a little less volatile than we thought, but they're still equally lucrative. In fact, in retail, we bought down a substantial amount of risk with the experiment that we ran, which happened to be a live exercise in Oakland that we ran with Safeway, where we had an A/B test with 8 stores total, A/B 4-4. And then education, the team approached me. If you'll recall from before, there was very little, discovery type activity, but that one wound up being a pivot. What they thought the issue was, you start asking the 5 whys, and it's not childhood security or early education security. It's basically personalized learning plans, and that one took a pivot and went in a completely different direction. So this is what innovation management accountability looks like, and now you can wash, rinse, repeat for the next design cycle, and you're basically re-enrolling your investors in the next opportunity.
We got a quick question from Elizabeth. What exactly is being tracked here? So the buy down is somehow this ignorance, but what exactly are you really tracking there?
Good question.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things we're tracking. The first one is the assumptions change with the enterprise value. So we're always paying attention to what the world's telling us about the value proposition or the value capture model. So that's the first thing, is what are the assumptions that are making up the financial opportunity?
Essentially from your first story, right?
That's from the first
evidence
story.
Of value.
Exactly. That's the evidence of value. And then the last one, the opportunity readiness, has to do with the value of evidence. So in this case, we've got the business model canvas, the world is revealing itself, and we've run experiments against hypotheses based on what are the unknown unknowns, what are the kind of speculative or uncertains, and what are the knowns. And these white buy downs are saying, hey, we spent your money, company, and this is what we've uncovered.
Checking off hypotheses.
Yeah, we're checking off hypotheses to get to an investment grade proposal that's worth scaling.
Okay.
So that's what we're measuring here. And this is this brings the dialogue back to the opportunity. It brings the dialogue back to, this is what the innovators are doing, and this is the results that it's having. And so this, financial metrics matter, and this is what happened during my tenure there. It's about a 30x return on innovation. I was entrusted with about $12 million over my 3-year term, 23% success rate, and it looked just like a venture capital. There were commercial successes. That VR backpack, the general manager of gaming, when he saw that, he's like, thank you, I'll take that off your hands, you're done now. That turned into a very lucrative business for HP, and today represents like a $2 billion market segment. We did a launch of the holster. We went from product meeting with the president and CEO of a partner company to a trade show demo in 90 days. And then 6 months later, they were actually selling the product in a commercial B2B arrangement. Once New York Police Department, Miami-Dade, and the LA Sheriff, which are kind of like the bellwether police departments, picked up the product, our partner said, wow, Ralph, HP, you guys have been a great development partner. I've got a check here. It's got some zeros, quite a few of them, and you need to come down to LA because I'm not sure what the first integer should be. We'd like to buy you out. And so that was our launch and buyout. We made an investment proposal for wellness and productivity in the office, and then we had a lot of invalidated opportunities, right? People came to us with their shiny or their best baby, and we basically worked them through this process and invalidated them. And the result was about $400 million of enterprise value that we created from the commercial success and the launch and buyout. So, the whole point of this story was investors, executive investors, they're buying options for big opportunities. And, we need to, my intention was, of course, you've got to be skillful at your craft of innovation. There's no getting around that. But on the other side, we talk experiments and hypothesis, but what the investor is interested in is when is this thing ready to scale, and how is the money I'm giving you basically increasing my option value? And so that's this concept of matching the innovator dialect of here's what I'm doing to the investor language of here's what it's worth. So I'm gonna kind of close, bring it all to a head and say at the beginning, this is just one person's journey through the innovation forest. Is the successful return on innovation formula really hinges on evidence of value, the value of evidence, and matching the innovator dialect to the investor language. So with that, we'll probably open it up to Q&A. Because I'm sure it'll be a lively discussion, but we offer this kind of in a workshop format for companies that are intrigued and interested in driving a higher return on their innovation activities.
Great. Well, thank you, Ralph. That was great. We do have a few questions here, and we're going to answer as many as we can in the next 10 minutes or so here. So if you have them, be sure to go ahead and enter them. The first question is sort of maybe a mechanical one from Stephen. Is could you just elaborate on this idea of the investment grade proposal? You went kind of quick and like, because you're investing in innovation, and then what are you investing with after that? So just sort of elaborate what that is a little bit.
Yeah, good question. So I don't cover it too much in this talk, but an investment grade proposal, if we go back to what we did with the retail publishing solutions, we went to the board of directors and said, okay, here's this market space. I'm actually gonna flip back so I can have an artifact of evidence in front of us. So if we go back and push this to the audience of an investment grade proposal, what you want to articulate is, okay, here's this opportunity. The unknowns are not unknown anymore.
Nothing speculative.
So there's nothing speculative. There's still there may or may not be some uncertainty. Different businesses have different thresholds, right? So some businesses might be very risk averse. So they'll be like, you've got way too many uncertainties. Can you narrow that? That's not ready to move over to a business unit yet. Some businesses that I've worked with, they're like, oh yeah, it's okay if there's one unknown left. We're okay taking that on from here because we like time to market, right? So we want to get working on this. So just be aware, different businesses have different risk tolerances. But back to the original question of what's an investment grade proposal, the thesis here is that, all right, we're not spending small sums of money, again, that small sums varies from company to company, but this is when the money gets real and relevant from a corporate standpoint. And so that's where a proposal, more like a classical business plan or product market opportunity roadmap would get put forward, and the company could say, okay, this is either something that will be moved over into a formal business unit or will be sanctioned as a growth opportunity until such time as it makes certain metrics or milestones. So I don't know.
Yeah, so that might be a great segue, because Philippe asked a question that you sort of touched on, I think, in that. He says, we've had a lot of success with early investments. We can get things going, but when the dollars get serious and the sort of rest of the organization has to get activated, they just get totally bogged down.
Oh.
And so you sort of touched on that with the investment grade proposal, but what's your experience with that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So Philippe, I have tons of empathy for that. I think some of the folks in my innovator salon have said, like, they either feel like the business units feel like it's getting thrown over the wall, and it kind of dies on the other side. But also back to the investment grade proposal, if the business unit is like, look, there's still from the innovator's perspective, we might have knocked off the things that are speculative and there's uncertainties. But in some cases, the business model or the value capture is different than what the existing business unit is doing. So for example, in personal systems case, they were make a widget, sell a widget was the business model, right? Manufacture it, put it in a box, swipe your credit card. In the case of the B2B play of the smartwatch, there was a unit that was sold B2B, but there's also a data services play that was sold ongoing multi-year contract to the brands. That's new. Right, so I think that's another one of the reasons why when you transfer things from the innovation space over to BUs, if the value capture is new, those are considered unknown unknowns also from the perspective of the business unit, and those sometimes need to be bought down as well.
Right. So the hypothesis wouldn't just be about the hypotheses you're buying down aren't just about the business model canvas. They're also about what it takes to convince the internal organization to move. And so they might have concerns that are not on the BMC. So the hypothesis could actually be quite broader. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the tools that we didn't have time to show is we use a maturity matrix in one of the lanes, one of the swim lanes. A lot of times innovators focus on, the job to be done. What is the thing? What's the product? What's the solution? These things live in the garden of corporate enterprise. And if they can't be planted somewhere, either organizationally off to the side or within existing BUs, then one of the swim lanes is, okay, who's our partner or who in the organization is going to adopt this? And do they believe in these risk scores? Do they believe in the opportunity readiness that the uncertainties have been brought down? And so that was one of our process control points was in the investment committee, we had EVPs and general managers from the various divisions that participated in that board, and they could say, I know you, Ralph, think the unknowns are unknown, but the uncertainties are too wide for me. I'm not ready to take this over yet. And that's fine. That's an admission that, hey, my risk tolerance for an investment-grade proposal is lower. Get me to that point, right?
So you incorporate them in the dialogue. I think we've got about a minute left, and there's one great question here, so maybe get a minute at this, the last question. So this is from Andrew. It says, you've described here 2 chapters of failure, 1 chapter of success that actually has, 25% success rate is fabulous, but there's actually a lot of failure in that.
Yeah.
So the question is, with all this failure, how did you find the courage to continue?
Oh, wow.
Innovator question.
Yeah, this is our, I don't know if we're genetically wired. I like to introduce myself that I stand for velocity, right? I think fast, I talk fast, and I move fast. And another value I have is, I just grew up in the Midwest. When people ask for help, you help them out. And the flip side of that is don't be ashamed to ask for help. And so, how do you find the courage to keep going on? It's like, this is kind of the innovator's genetic code, right? It's like, oftentimes the team would say when the backpack got stolen I shouldn't say stolen, the team felt the backpack got stolen, and that we should have kept that longer and made it a success.
By stolen, you mean passed off to the
passed off to the business unit. And I had to sit down in an authentic dialogue with the team, which was, no, our job is to scout, find, and cultivate, right? If you want to ride the whole thing up on the success journey and all that other stuff, then let me know, and I'll put you in the plan so that you can transfer with the opportunity. And we did that with a couple of the opportunities. We moved people over to the partner that bought us over. We had people leave HP and go work for the partner company, and that's okay. But don't be disillusioned with what our job role is. Our job is to discover. So if we find an invalid project, that doesn't mean you're fired. That doesn't mean we failed. We did our job. We invalidated a project.
Right. So you're saying, though, but being in on this discussion of the hypotheses, not just for the prospect, for the opportunity, but also for the whole business and what it takes to win them over, and proving that out itself is a way of finding kind of inspiration and direction.
Yeah, and the execs relished it. I mean, we had one exec for the education that said, we came back and told him his baby was really ugly, and it was his idea about security for kids. And when we told him no, he pushed back, and then we said no. Then he pushed back even harder, and the whole team was like, oh, God, Ralph's going to get creamed. And I said, no, it's not. If you want to waste more money, we'll spend it and we'll do it. But I'm telling you right now, it's a waste of money. So that's I think that's the courage that it takes to do the innovation, the innovation role.
Great. Well, thank you, Ralph. That concludes the content of our presentation. I think Amanda has a few administrative remarks here to finish this off.
Yes. Yep. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Ralph, David, and SmartOrg, and everyone who joined this webinar today. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll be sending you a link to the recording tomorrow. If you'd like to register for more sessions of FEI Digital Week, please visit our registration page, which is located in the resource area of your webinar console. And if you'd like more content like what you heard today, don't miss the FEI event in 2020 taking place May 4th through 6th in Boston, Massachusetts. As a special thank you to our valued FEI Digital Week attendees, we're offering you an exclusive $200 off your ticket when you use code FEI20DW. For more information about the event or to register, please visit frontendofinnovation.com. And one last thing, once you leave this webinar, there's a short survey that will pop up in your browser window. We'd really appreciate it if you could share your feedback on this webinar because it helps us to provide you with content that's most interesting for you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Stay skillful.